Hi, thank you so much, Elle, for being here. This is When the Artist Speaks, where we interview different artists. And thank you so much for taking time to talk about your dance work, Elle.
Oh my God, thanks so much for having me.
Yay. Okay, so the first time I saw you, this is really interesting. I was actually performing, and I actually never look at the audience because I'm always like really shy. But I remember I saw this person. I was like, "Who is that like really beautiful like Asian person with this blonde hair?" And then I saw that you were doing a residency at Art Gym. And I
Yeah.
yeah, and it was like really experimental. It almost reminded me a little bit of like Merce Cunningham and the fact that it's kind of like experimental video work. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I really want to see this person perform." And then me and my mom saw you at the Somebody's Friend Movement Festival. And it was just incredible. It's definitely one of my favorite performances I've seen. We talked about how, we felt like we really walked away with like something very deep. And I think like not a lot of performances do that. I felt like there was something really extra special of you sharing yourself through movement and text. And yeah, I felt like you built this really complex tapestry of movement, vocabulary, and text. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your creative process and how you blend all these different movement vocabularies into your choreographic work.
Yeah, I think, many choreographers will relate to that sort of feeling of like, I'm in a rehearsal space alone. I have to make the thing happen. And sometimes going into a rehearsal to make a solo can literally just be like lying on the floor, being like, why isn't the dance coming out? And at some point, like, there has to be this sort of switch of like, I have to actually create like rituals or practices or discipline myself to um, make something and have something that feels like cohesive when watched through. I think when I choreograph, it's really easy for me when I have another person in the room because there's something that happens when there's sort of that pressure of like someone's watching me. I have to feel or like look like I know what I'm doing. And so something can happen when like throughout those showings with the other create award artists when I was making the piece, those sort of deadlines really helped me to be like, okay, just show like whatever you've been working on. And for so much of it, like I was hiding behind the curtain because I didn't want like to be seen. And there was something about not wanting to be seen and playing with this sort of like visibility invisibility divide uh in which like when you try to make yourself invisible like hiding behind a curtain, it actually does like the opposite, and it makes you like extremely visible. People are like, what are you doing? You're not really hiding very well. um but I think there's something to that, and the desire to hide, knowing that it's kind of funny and that it's like kind of deeply unsuccessful. I think nowadays when choreographing, like I just have to like get over the voice in my head that's like, this isn't gonna look good. Like this is not like aesthetically on the outside, it doesn't look good. Um, because I had to spend so many years like creating solos where it's just me looking in a mirror. And for so long of that process, I guess like for the last 4 to 5 years now, I had to like at some point just reframe and be like, that mirror is what people are seeing. So if you yourself are like not okay with what you're seeing in the mirror, then you need to take the steps necessary to start being okay looking at yourself. So there was, at least in that process, so much was going on regarding dancing in ways where I could stand looking at myself, and also finding ways of knowing that choreography well enough that I could forget about my body and just like do the dance, which I think, a lot of other dancers relate to that sort of sense of like, I've transcended my body and I've kind of blacked out while I'm performing because I just have to like be a vessel for whatever this feeling is, whether that be like influenced by the music or the score, which music plays such a huge role in terms of creating a sort of like affective, feeling based world. And I really try to follow my feelings in terms of like, um, you know, for the version of the piece that you saw at somebody's friend, it's like I've restaged that so many times and it's a piece that's like so deeply about vulnerability. And yeah, I've been asked to like perform it in like such wild spaces like Patagonia, where people are shopping and like
As
people,
well, like the fact that it's at Patagonia.
yeah, I mean, and that was also a last minute call. Like I was supposed to be in a different space and then it was like, now we're in Patagonia. And I was like, okay, this is what else am I'm on a clothing rack. Like, when else am I gonna get to dance here?
Yeah,
Um,
it was cool. I liked the space a lot for your performance. It was really cool.
Thanks. I don't know if the people shopping were quite as happy to like have their day. And it was also like the weather was really awful. We were having like, remember like smoke during that time. Like the weather was just
Yeah,
smoke. It was
yeah,
fire.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, the air quality was really intense. Yeah, I remember that.
it's
Yeah.
awful. So yeah, it was just like a really interesting time. I feel like I've gone way off course in terms of talking about both somebody's friend and also how I blend different movement. But in short, I would just say I try to follow like a feeling of weirdness or a feeling of like, okay, this is sort of like off or unsettling. And also at the same time, it's composed and um I I try not to follow like a through line that's like this. And instead, if I feel like I'm too in this mode, I might just, you know, for lack of better words, like I like doing the thing that maybe is expected and then sharply doing something that's like deeply unexpected. Um, but that was just like for that particular piece. And maybe it might look different based on whatever I'm working on.
Yeah, I yeah, a lot there. Yeah, so I think this kind of relates to another question that I had about you talking about your work on your website, about the how your work examines the power structure of viewing and being viewed. And I found that really interesting. And I also found it interesting in your last response about the idea of not wanting to be seen and being seen, those like two different kind of parallels living together, which I think is interesting because I think also with dance, it's such a visual art form, and you have a lot of people looking at you. And I think just as people, some days you're like, yeah, I want to be seen, and other days you're just like, I'm kind of over the critique about my Tandu or whatever, you know?
Totally.
So I feel like that's a really interesting thing to examine. And so I'm curious if you can kind of elaborate a bit more on that, because I also kind of feel like that piece also kind of had that element at the end about kind of power structures and uh, being viewed and all of that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I think also something that I see in your work is that it also is examining that. And that we as dancers cannot sort of escape that we are a visual art form, even if we might not necessarily be considered that by, I guess, like larger visual arts land sort of structures. Because what we give is very ephemeral and also very subjective. that could be said about like visual art, but usually visual art is like, here's the thing and it lives forever.
Hmm.
Versus dance is like, here's the thing, and the video doesn't capture like what it felt like being there, because there's a difference between what it feels like watching performance versus like watching it back as an archival sort of thing. I think also as dancers who navigate, you know, a very Eurocentric form, like we said tendu earlier, and that's like literally French. Like I I think we can't escape the fact that we are read in racialized and gendered and sexualized ways. And, my movement quality is judged differently. And I feel like I learned this pretty young, starting off in dance, than, like, say, a white colleague. And that, as much as that frustrates me, it's also something that I think is really central to my work, is to claim like a um yes, I understand that you are seeing me as a racialized being. And let's talk about that, like let's have a moment of under or sexualized or gendered being. Like I think so much of this particular work, um it dealt with the sort of dissonance that happens, like when maybe you see my outline or you see my body or you see my body without my face and then I turn around, or you see me doing like extremely hyper feminine like club movements, but then you also remember hearing my voice, and there's that sort of like disconnect between interiority and exteriority. I think those are things that are always really central to my work, um, in this sort of like questioning of like, okay, well, I'm I feel something on the inside and I'm trying to bring it out, and I need to do the work on the outside in order to feel differently on the inside. And how much of that work is intrinsic, like I actually want to do that, versus how much of that work feels like an external pressure that is put on by a heteronormative society, by folks who might not know anything about transgender people or haven't seen transgender dancers. So yeah, my I do think my work like explores that pretty explicitly, but also that isn't like the main focus of the work. The focus of the work is like I'm trying to like internally locate a sense of lightness or levity that feels impossible to break through to like actually find, because of these sort of external factors that feel very heavy and weighted, whether that be the way my body is read racially or in a gendered way. Um, and like understanding that if I'm doing the sort of work of externalizing, I have other versions of the piece where I ask the audience to participate as like a four-part choir. Um, and I think in that way, it's a bit more explicit that I'm trying to implicate the audience in terms of like, okay, you're watching this, but also you're gonna work for me and you're gonna like do a little work to understand like how difficult it is for me to even like use my voice in a performance, or um like even dance. Like it's such a I think people really take for granted, like because the whole work of it all is to like not really display the effort, unless the work is about effort. But yeah, aesthetically, so much of dance has been taught to be like, look effortless, look like you meant to do that, look like it's not hard. Um, but it's really hard. And I think, because we have bodies, we can relate to one another in that way when we see dance. Like, I might, this dance might not necessarily be my cup of tea, and it might not even be for me. It might just be for the artist. but I can empathize that that looks hard. That's like that takes a specific amount of training or dedication. Um, and I think that that is a bit more important sometimes than like the meaning behind a work, if that makes sense. Like it's more important to create space for empathy and feeling and maybe even feelings that conflict within yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, again, like so much there. Yeah, I think I've been really thinking a lot too recently about how like dance can just be like grueling and the injuries and like it's so there's like this other side of it that the audience doesn't see that's like really intense. And yeah, I find that really interesting. I think I kind of also wonder too, like in when I think of um history, like that saying, like beauty is pain, and like I don't know, like this idea of like I don't know, it's very interesting, like this idea of presenting beautiful things to
Mhm.
people, even if it's like not negatively affecting the person.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like, it's dark. It's like yeah, um, yeah. There's a lot there. Yeah, I also wanted to ask you about how how has dance been a tool for voicing identity, gender, queer, and trans social justice topics in your work? I think, like you said, I think it's really important because you said earlier, like there's some people who've never met a trans person or a trans dancer, and I think that it's really, I think that's why I think diversity is so important because people get to learn about different people. And yeah, so anyway, I just was curious if you could talk a little bit more about that because I saw some other clips on your website and it seems like other work of yours has also like dove into this topic and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think, you know, performance is a sort of, I wouldn't say like completely safe space because, we take risks and danger presents itself within dance, like whether that be physically or psychologically. Um, but it has served as like a pretty exploratory space in terms of having conversations or dealing with things that sometimes feel really negative, or sometimes it can feel like a really perfect opportunity. um, I don't want to say to like educate, but to create a sort of learning moment. um, Whether that be like, you know i I'm doing work specifically on migration, and the literal topographical score is going to be like tracing my mother's like migration route from South Korea to the like North America, and then to where I'm originally from, Honolulu. Um, so yeah, I think there are tons of ways that these topics come up in my work in a really like rather explicit way. Whether that be like I am trying to uncover my own personal history, which often feels very like shrouded in mystery or very like lost to me as a person who is descendant of immigrants. Home is always something that feels very fraught to me. But I also know that that probably rings true for many people. So I think the the in to my work might be like the sort of specificity in which like I'm asking questions about identity. But I think the underlying desire is to connect with people, um, because everyone can relate to like having an identity, whether, you know, that's clear for them or not. Everyone feels the type of way. Everyone, I think dance has really taught me a lot more about like what folks have in common, as opposed to like our differences. Um, and I think, yeah, even though dance is a great way to illuminate personal difference or um, provide that sort of like teaching moment, I also don't necessarily think it's like everyone's prerogative or duty to teach through dance. I think like you can make a dance about literally anything and it would still be about all of those things, if that makes sense. Um, so these days I'm trying to like stick more towards like my ideas, knowing that all of those things will already like be infused into the work itself. I just like have to be open to not knowing in that moment.
Mhm. Um, so I was curious, let's see, what would you tell your younger self knowing what you know now?
Woo! Um, that's a heavy question. I guess I would say like chill. um, don't freak out so much and just like continue like enjoy your close friendships because as you get older, it's harder to stay connected with people. Um, but yeah, I think my younger self like underwent tremendous amount of stress for like zero reason at all because at the end of the day, like I don't even really remember the things that happened when I was younger and like first starting to get into at least dance in an academic sort of context and then after that into dance in the real world context. um so yeah, I think I would just try to say like have more fun while you can and uh like communicate better and don't be afraid to communicate because that often brings greater clarity.
Oh, cool. So, I noticed that you have a current residency at Red Line, right? Which is awesome. Could you talk a little bit more about, what you're currently working on, how people can learn more about your work, as an artist, things like that? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm a resident artist at Redline through the end of 2026, um, which feels like a whiles away, but I know that it'll be over before I know it. I'll be restaging my piece that I did in Somebody's Friend Movement Festival. Um, Lightness Has a Call That's Hard to Hear in mid-April and early June. I'm currently working on some writing. I'm also a poet, so I've been working on revising a manuscript over and over and over. Um, and then in terms of any like installation things, I'm working on a table for the Red Line Epic Gala, um, where I'll be creating a chandelier that is modeled after my body,
Oh,
along with some artist books or maybe less formally zines that will be like limited edition for the folks who buy my table. Um, and in terms of dance, I'm really excited to begin working with an ensemble of dancers. We're still getting some logistics and scheduling things um, nailed down, but I'm really looking forward to like having the opportunity to stand outside the work and make changes and uh, visually take in all the information in that way, as opposed to I'm sure you can understand this, but being in the work often it's hard to like step outside of yourself and make like aesthetic decisions. Um, so I'm excited for that, and I'm excited, to have a process again because I don't. It's been so long since I've had like a long rehearsal period of just like, all right, whatever comes up will come up, and then something will happen. Um, the work itself is titled Potemkin Village, which refers to the sort of mythology of facades or villages that are like fake villages that
Mm.
are built to hide a lot of sinister or complicated stuff in the background, like a blurry filter on my background. Um, and I think that's a really apt metaphor for the times that we're currently going through, where there's just this sort of like pretty facade or, um, yeah, painting that's sort of placed over reality, which is deeply complicated, and how that can relate to identity, how that relates to how humans relate to one another. I think mirrors are coming up a lot, like, especially in terms of engaging with the world in a political way. We often find ourselves mirroring or surrounding ourselves with people who are like mirrors of our own thought, as opposed to like what could happen if there were more opposition. So, and how that relates to the algorithm. It's a lot of thoughts. It's a lot of things that I'm thinking through, but yeah, maybe that for another time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so cool. Yeah, no, thank you so much for your time. I think that it's just exciting to have seen your work, exciting to hear of all the work that you're currently making. I think that, you know, you have a lot of depth and um it's exciting to see someone that has like such a kind of robust choreographed voice at such a young age. Like that's exciting, I think it's really exciting and um yeah, and it's also really cool to meet someone who loves to make solo work because because like that's something that I don't know why I always loved being in a studio alone making work.
Mm.
I don't know why. And so it's kind of nice to meet someone else that also really like likes solo work.
Mm.
So yeah, anyway. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just like, yeah, solo work is very special, and it wasn't always the case that I liked doing it. Um but there's so much to be learned through that process, whether that be like learning to rely on your gut and your instinct, and learning how to trust yourself, and learning how to love yourself and see what's reflected back at you. And um, yeah, it's just a very rich space. um, I think everyone, like, yes, it can be terrible and maybe even like scary, but I think there's a lot to be gained in doing the scary thing. So
For sure. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll
thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
You take care.
Yeah, you too.